Well, welcome to this official side event of the United Nations Sustainable Transport Conference, the second conference on the platform of sustainable transport being led by the United Nations in concert with partners. Hello, my name is Andrew Peterson. I'm the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. This conference, or this side event rather, called Taking the Pulse of Mobility, is being brought to you by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia, and the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies. Today, we're going to be giving you an insight into a program of work that the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia has been undertaking in concert with its members in the Cities and Mobility Work Group. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But before I do, as is the usual practice of events that are brought to their attendees from Australia, it is right and appropriate that we acknowledge the original inhabitants, the first peoples of our nation. And I'm coming to you today from the land of the Camaragal people. And in doing so, I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. And if we do have any First Nations people joining us today, a particular welcome to you. As I indicated, this particular presentation is in relation to some work that our organisation, as part of the Secretariat on behalf of its members, have been undertaking for the last couple of years. We do thank right up front the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs for the opportunity of making this presentation via the Sustainable Transport Conference, and in particular a shout out to our colleagues at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who are in fact our sponsors for this conference today, for this side event rather today. As you can see on the screen, the agenda will go through an explanation about the project, and we'll hear from Professor Johnson, who was one of the lead authors of the report, in a few moments. And then we're going to hear from a number of our members who have participated in and highlighted particular case studies within this particular report, which highlight or go to the point that we make in the heading of this particular side event on insights on Australia, on the business role in Australia of driving employee, customer and sector mobility options. And then we will have a Q&A opportunity. So if you do have any questions, please, in the usual way, put those questions through the Q&A format, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of the screen. Let me just give you a quick understanding of our organisation. We are part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we have been, as a business and non-government, industry non-government organisation, in existence for now over 30 years. We have about 60, almost 70 members. They span largely business, but also include philanthropy, the public sector and local government, as well as tertiary institutions such as the University of Sydney Business School, of which the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies forms a part. Our approach in the work that we do with the members is very much aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. And within that, the work is framed around 6 particular work group areas. And this piece of work was done in and around the work of cities and mobility. So without further ado, I would now like to introduce Professor John Nelson and ask John if he would like to open up his video and also unmute himself, and welcome him to give us an understanding about the project. John is the Chair in Public Transport at the University of Sydney Business School and heads the work of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies. So without further ado, John, welcome, and I will now hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Could I have the next slide, please? I thought I would just begin by taking the opportunity to give a few words about our institute, ITLS, which is it's actually headed by our founding director, Professor David Hensher. We are established since 1991, so a very long established group with a focus on bringing together promoting the latest thinking on the linked areas of transport, infrastructure, logistics, and supply chain management. And we bring a strongly interdisciplinary approach to the work that we do. And we have a very important programme of engagement with industry, and it's a great pleasure to have been able to support the Business Council in this particular research project. Could I have the next slide, please? So my brief was just to set the scene, to say a little bit about the Mobility Pulse Insights report, the rationale behind the work, and why we think this is an important topic. And then, as you've heard already, we'll go on to hear in more detail from some of the industry colleagues who contributed case studies to the report. Our overall objective was to investigate the ways in which businesses do play an essential role in influencing both employee and stakeholder travel choices. And as you've already heard from Andrew, this project was part of a collaboration with the Business Council, and one of our master's students, Eugene Tarantula, completed an internship with the Business Council as part of this project. The report as a whole describes how mobility management strategies, when carefully crafted, can be used to derive environmental, social and economic benefits for business. And whilst we were working, as you'll see in a moment, primarily in a pre-COVID and moving in to COVID phase, some of the insights that we derived, I think, are quite important in shaping the forward agenda, because the scope of the work was very much about identifying opportunities for business at the interface of influences on sustainable mobility. And so we were able to identify benefits and opportunities, for example, to improve employee health and well-being, particularly for example, through the promotion of active travel initiatives, to bring about measures for generating economic savings, not just for businesses themselves, but the wider economy as a whole, and to challenge businesses to think a little more about how they interface with the climate challenge. Next slide, please. So this was, as you've heard already, an Australian focus study, and indeed much of our interaction was within the context of New South Wales, but certainly relevant to Australia and beyond. Our methodology embraced several strands. We had a survey of members of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia, followed up by a number of interviews, and finally an interactive workshop. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the timing of this study is quite interesting, because the bulk of the work was done in terms of data collection in the period of April and May last year, at the point at which stay-at-home orders had just been implemented. We interacted with some 25 organisations, and together they have a reach of around 150,000 employees. An important part of this work was to assemble case studies of good practice, and so we put some thought into just what those strands of good practice in the context of sustainable mobility management might be, and in no particular order: remote and flexible work, which I'll have a comment or two to make on before I conclude; organisational approaches to mobility management, the extent to which it's a topic that may or may not have been featuring on the institutional agenda; green travel plans, and whether or not they feature within for example, the induction programme of businesses, and a number of the measures that we already have quite a lot of experience around, such as carpooling, active transport I've mentioned already, fleet management, particularly relevant in the context of mobility and demand for mobility within the course of the working days, moving in to embrace the electrification and e-mobility agenda. We'll hear from one of the relevant case studies there shortly, as we will the carpooling, and asset reconfiguration and sustainable logistics. Next slide. And so just in terms of highlighting a few of the findings, I think the headline finding would be that there are considerable opportunity. What we were able to confirm was that actually the engagement levels with many of the sustainable mobility tools was indeed rather lower than one might wish. As I mentioned, we were doing this piece of work at the outbreak of COVID, and just looking at this chart, whilst many of our respondents told us that they had policies in place for remote working, we know, of course, that having a policy is one thing, having it actually widely implemented is another. And so most of the organisations that we dealt with actually had little experience with enacting their remote working policies. That's something that has changed quite considerably over the last 18 months. And most of the other typical measures that you would be looking for around the use of carpooling apps, having organised car sharing, first, last mile shuttles and so on, there was relatively little uptake at the time of the time of the survey. So this really enabled us to help to contribute towards a call for action for a greater focus on some of these sustainable mobility outcomes, particularly since there is considerable prior practice and expertise available to draw on. We hope that, particularly in the time since this work was implemented, and I think we maybe be talking a little bit later on about the things that have happened since or over the last 18 months, that the agenda has shifted towards a greater focus on sustainable mobility, and certainly work that ITLS is involved in the context of working from home shows that this is a policy lever that is now front and centre, and that indeed we should see working from home as one of the several travel demand management measures that are available. But in order for that to be consolidated, the role of the employer is particularly important. The other thing we know that there are changing attitudes towards shared transport solutions. Public transport across the globe has taken a considerable hit in terms of patronage as a result of the pandemic, and there's still a lot of work to be done in order to help rebuild confidence that public transport is safe to use. So we hope that as a result of doing this work and promoting the findings, that we might be able to advance the sustainable mobility agenda in the context of businesses. And at that point, I think I hand back to you, Andrew.
John, thank you very much. Okay, so you've heard the context and you've heard John's explanation of both the methodology and also the findings. But what helped us understand what was going on in and across business at the time in which the work was being done, this is clearly work prior to pandemic, and what were the drivers and the signals that were being given to business and internally and strategically for business to develop sustainable mobility models. So what we now want to do is move to an understanding via 3 case studies around that particular area of work. And the first comes from IKEA in Australia. And to give you an insight, I'm delighted to welcome Melissa Hamilton, the Country Sustainability Manager Australia for IKEA, to share with you the work that IKEA has been doing in Australia. Over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Andrew. My role here in Australia is to implement the sustainability strategy. And within the Inca group, our sustainability strategy is called People and Planet Positive. Within that strategy, we're looking at three main change drivers: healthy and sustainable living, circular and climate positive, and fair and inclusive. Underneath each one of these change drivers, there's goals and initiatives that are expected to be planned and implemented in each country. And today I'm mainly going to focus on, of course, circular and climate positive, of where we were during this report and where we are now today, according to EV vehicles for our last mile home deliveries. Thank you. Next slide, please. So our ambition is by 2025, our aim is for 100% of transport for customer deliveries and services to use electric vehicles or other zero emissions. By 2025, all our owned, leased, and shared vehicles in our fleet to be EV or other zero emission options. Here in Australia, actually, within this model, we do not own our own fleet. We actually work through a third-party service provider across different states. And the last one is by 2030, aim to reduce relative emissions by 50% from coworker and customer travel to our physical touch points. Next slide, please. So where are we today? Actually, going back when we started on this journey back in 2019, IKEA became the first home furnishing retailer in Australia to implement EV vehicles for home deliveries and assembly services. Back then in 2000, when this report came out, ANC, Australian National Carriers, were our first service providers to actually have electric vehicles. Since then, you can see in the picture, our other partners such as King's Transport located in Victoria and All Purpose Transport located in Queensland has also come on board with their own fleet, as well as our home furnishing assembly partners Install2U. And since then, we've also acquired Install Easy and Assemble Anything to implement home deliveries and assembly services with electrical vehicles across Australia. Currently, there are 11 EV vehicles for last mile home delivery across all states that we operate in today. And we have the ambition to hit a milestone of 25% rollout this fiscal year. That's around an additional 150,000 deliveries in partnership with our delivery partners by the end of fiscal year 22. Today, we sit around the 8 to 9% mark. For our assembly partner Install2U, we currently have 2 vehicles, one servicing Metro Melbourne and the other one in Metro Brisbane. We'll soon launch another 2 in Sydney with Install Easy. These are all positive milestones, but really only the starting point on our long journey ahead. Next slide, please. What I would like to say is that since the report, we've seen a lot of movement in particularly one area of these challenges that you see on the screen. Infrastructure has moved a lot that we've seen over the last year, according to mainly being driven by state government. But I would like to mainly take the time right now to focus on the other 2 challenges that we really should be addressing, which is cost, range, and performance of vehicles, and the availability and competition on the market. When it comes to cost, range, and performance, most of our delivery partners have started their journey to electrify their fleets, as I mentioned already. However, the underdeveloped market and prohibitive regulatory conditions in Australia means that we cannot scale or increase the pace fast enough to get more commercial vehicles on the road until we have a firm policy, investment, and a timeline for the transition at a national level. There are simply not enough trucks available right now today for take-up, and cost remains prohibitively high, while performance remains far from expectations. Today, there are only a few providers of commercial electric vehicles in the Australian market, which cost approximately 2 to 3 times more than the equivalent diesel combustion vehicle. Additionally, available vehicles cannot perform at the required levels to meet regular business needs. This includes how we, or particularly for our customers, expect us to offer our delivery services. We want to offer convenient and affordable services to our customers and therefore need equipment to support that ambition. Battery technology is also limited with the current commercial options, and combined with a lack of charging infrastructure means distance to constrained metropolitan areas and reduced operating capacity and drive range. On-road and technical support is still not there available in the marketplace. This includes warranty and servicing structures available for the few available EVs purchased today, but also support networks for breakdowns and or battery issues, as we've already experienced with our service providers, while en route and in operation. We expect this as a prerequisite to operate effectively. Then if we start looking at availability and competition, currently the lack of EV competition offers no incentive for businesses, large or small, to invest in zero emission vehicles and create wide-scale take-up of EV. All levels of government have the potential to aggregate their commercial fees, for example, to encourage competition in the Australian market. This will incentivize other manufacturers to bring zero emission vehicles into the Australian market and open up more affordable and diverse options to business and the broader public. We should also be looking at the subsidy potential for EV trucks for primary purchasers, which will accelerate the take-up from private sector and users and support the development of a market for second-hand vehicles. We feel businesses here are starting to recognize the important role they play in addressing this issue and want to take action. IKEA nor any other business with zero emission targets here in Australia will be able to achieve these goals within the current policy environment. So to end, I hope this helps frame just some of the key challenges that we have experienced and continue to experience, but also the huge opportunity that sits right in front of us. Thank you, and I'll pass back to Andrew.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for that very interesting case study of work that perhaps most of the rest of the world hasn't appreciated has been undertaken in Australia in very important area of supply chain. And I can speak as a customer of IKEA that is very welcome to receive an electric vehicle to your door with your package at the appropriate time. You just have to wrestle it from your 16-year-old daughter, but that's another challenge that is not IKEA's problem. Let us now move to the issue of carpooling and car sharing. And to do that, I welcome Iain MacDougall, who is the head of growth at Lift and Go or Liftango. Well, that is a question that we need to have answered even before we move forward. So without further ado, looking forward to hearing about the case study of this very unique and Indigenous company from Australia. Over to you, Iain.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and well, thanks to everyone also for taking the time to come to the session today. It really is a pleasure to speak on this panel. I think it's well recognised that everyone here has a really strong commitment to leading by example when it comes to sustainability. So it's great to be here. So just quickly by way of background, Liftango. There you go, Andrew. Liftango is an Australian born and bred startup company. We are a transport technology provider, and we work with a range of organisations, large businesses, universities, public transport authorities, government institutions, quite a range of people. Essentially, anyone who has to move large bodies of people, we help them to do that in an efficient and sustainable manner, essentially. So our aim or our ethos as a business is to unlock all the good that comes from shared transport. We know that transport can be the key to a lot of positives in terms of how you interact with society, the opportunities that you can get. So for us, it's about environmental and social good that we can help to create. And that's really what drives the products that we develop and also the organisations that we choose to do business with. So in regards to the Mobility Pulse survey and the general trends in commuting, it's been a very interesting couple of years. We know, at the moment, obviously the patterns of work have changed, and they are changing. And I guess we've been in a lucky enough position to be speaking to a range of businesses about how they do things and what those changes in workplace behaviour and people movement have meant in Australia, but also in North America and in Europe through partners such as IKEA and others. So what, in terms of how we help other businesses, and what we've really come to understand is that when you're trying to implement some kind of mobility program, there's really two distinct stakeholders that need to be considered. One is obviously the organisation itself, and that organisation will often have a set of goals and desires, which may be based on various elements of sustainability, such as reducing Scope 3 emissions. But the other set of stakeholders who is probably key to any type of mobility program is the employees or the commuters themselves. And partly because these employees may or may not share those organisations' ideals. Some of them will, but they generally have a much more immediate focus when it comes to making commuter choices. So with all of that background, that feeds into the way that we develop our solutions and also help implement them. So what the Mobility Pulse Survey has really highlighted, along with other work we've done previously, is that in order for a successful behaviour change program, which is what this really is, a carpooling program or on-demand program, it's about changing those embedded behaviours of commuters for the better. And in order for that type of program to be successful, all of the stakeholders need to work together in some fashion. So I'll start just with the organisation approach first, and then dig a bit deeper into how we've gone about implementing a successful commuter travel carpooling program with a large business in Australia. So you can see from the diagram on the screen with all the nice screenshots and so on, that we provide a technology system or a suite that's capable of handling a range of mobility options, whether that's fixed shuttle buses, picking people up from a train station and taking them to a corporate campus, a demand responsive or on-demand type of service, climate positive carpooling. And I think why this is important that we've tried to build a system that does a lot of things is that it can offer an organisation essentially a one-stop shop type of approach, where an employee can have options, choose what is the most appropriate transport that suits me on that day at that time as part of a managed program. So as John pointed out earlier from the Mobility Pulse survey findings, the organisational approaches to promoting sustainable mobility may have been somewhat underdeveloped, I guess, at the time the survey was taken. One of the reasons that we see this in talking to our colleagues and people, it's just the complexity of actually managing it, because there's a lot to consider, there's a lot to work through. But if we can have some kind of system that helps the organisation do this sort of thing, it serves a few purposes really. So it provides an easy to use set of options for employers, and this is critical. So ease of use is really one of the key drivers for success, and we've seen examples where if a program or a solution is not easy to access, not easy to use, there's a big barrier to people using it. So making it easy is critical. It also enables the collection and analysis of data, and this obviously becomes important for reporting on your activities, including sustainability activities, but also for understanding in a lot more detail, sitting alongside workplace travel surveys and things like that, how the people in your organisation are actually moving to and from work. And from that data and from that analysis, you can start to implement new programs, new conditions, and build up a really strong picture of what's happening. But also, what's also interesting is by integrating with other systems such as a commuter benefits platform or a parking management platform, really an organisation can have the end-to-end process of someone getting to and from work mapped out quite visually and easy to understand. And we've found that approach really helps people, organisations get on board with trying to implement things and being a bit more successful at it. That's all great from the organisation's perspective, but what we also found is a program like this to be successful, it really has to have positive impact on the employees and the commuters themselves. So I'll just quickly, next slide please, Andrew. So this example is a carpooling program that we instituted with Business Woolworths in Australia. It's a good example, and I think it can give you some context to how we can collectively make a meaningful change to commuter behaviours. So this program was a carpooling specific program, a peer-to-peer type program, so colleagues could share rides to and from a central location. It focused on staff working in one of the major centres. Obviously, they've got lots of different centres, but this was one in Western Sydney, which didn't have very good public transport access. It was far away from a lot of other locations. I think there was about 3,000 or so staff that were on site prior to COVID. So this is a good example because it brings together a lot of the common drivers that we see and also the common challenges for this type of commuter program. So one of the major drivers for Woolworths in investigating this and eventually implementing it was really to just reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced by their employees while commuting. So they identified that there was a very high reliance on, or very high use of single occupancy vehicles amongst their employees. And this is actually indicative of many Australian businesses. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Australian way of doing things, we are a very car reliant culture, big open spaces, lots of distance between. And I guess this example is also indicative of lots of other similar geographies which had similar problems. Really, I think when it comes to the employees, the major challenge we face when implementing a carpooling program or another type of program like this is a question of convenience. So the most convenient option for an employee is usually just to get in their car, to park out in front of their house. They can travel exactly where they want to go to, when they want to get there. Hopefully for them, it's a quick drive, not too much congestion. And then in the ideal world, they find a free car park right outside the office or work location. So this is what we're competing against. It really, why would you do anything different from the employee's perspective? And alongside that, there's often resistance to sharing a vehicle with someone else for a range of reasons. I won't go into all of those. But what we did with Woolworths was to look at all the different pain points, all the reasons why people would not want to carpool, and then design and implement a program to make it easy to use this system and also to try and overcome all of those barriers that we identified. So the approach that we took is outlined here. Firstly, we created an exclusive carpool app with the Team Ride branding. This was a Woolworths branding exercise. And the effect of this was to create a kind of club atmosphere amongst the employees. And it also means that only Woolworths employees can share rides with each other. So one of the barriers to using a shared transport app is mixing with the general public or people that you don't know. So by locking it down to an organisation, this actually helps to give confidence in who you are travelling with, and you're able to create little buddy groups and things like that to help take effect of the carpooling program. So then we worked with Woolworths to effect the redesign of their car parking. So what we've seen from a range of implementations is two of the main drivers for success of a carpooling program are cost reductions for parking and an increase in convenience. So in the case of Woolworths, the parking was free, so we can't make that cheaper, but it was scarce. Those 3,000 people who worked there were fighting for parks, and people would work around the car park for a long time trying to find somewhere to park. So what we did, we were able to section off around about 50 car parks that could only be used by verified carpoolers. So again, another thing is making sure that the right people are actually accessing these car parks that are designated for carpooling and people aren't abusing the system. So these car parks were positioned right next to the entrance to the main building. So that means two things for the carpoolers. One, the guarantee of getting space. So as long as you're sharing with someone, verified through the Team Ride app, you are provided with a space. You are directed to that space. And when you get there, you're going to just drive in, park in bay 6, and out you get. You don't have to drive around for 20 minutes. And also that park that you did get was right next to the building. So it's really trading on that convenience factor. So it's asking the commuters or the workers a question: do you want to drive your own car and maybe get a park, maybe not, maybe park 15 minutes walk away after driving around for 20 minutes? Or do you want to share a ride with someone and go straight to a dedicated park right outside the building? So that's the question we were asking with this type of implementation. And then we put together a comprehensive program marketing campaign. This consisted quite a few different elements: launch events, information sign-up sessions, high visibility branding all around the building and the car park, a big sign as you go into the car park, lots of different things like that. I think this is really, it was probably one of their most successful launches, which is really credit to Woolworths for how well the organisation embraced this and the effort they put into trying to make it work, and also the employees, of course, who bought into the scheme. So then I guess the final piece of the puzzle for this program was creating customised rewards for carpoolers, providing different vouchers and sort of gamifying the process of carpooling. So with all of that in mind, I can't hear the bell ringing, but I'm sure I'm getting a hurry up from Andrew. So unfortunately, the program was cut short by COVID, and as John mentioned, the movement restriction orders that came into force. But prior to that happening, it was quite successful and was on a really good ramp. We were able to remove thousands of trips, so thousands of times people chose to carpool with someone else rather than drive themselves, which is exactly what Woolworths wants, exactly what we wanted. And the effect of that was reducing a whole lot of greenhouse gas production. And I guess this sort of thing en masse means you can invest less in costly infrastructure, environmentally damaging infrastructure. So by changing the behaviour, you can save some dollars along the way as well. So I'll probably wrap up there. That'll be it for me. So back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. And we will return during the Q&A session to what happened during COVID, and obviously a question about, well, what happens post-COVID? Because this is a very important program of work, particularly, as Ian says, around behavioural change. And in one sense, you don't want to see the loss of that behavioural change occurring, but how do you institutionalise it in the sense that it continues on in circumstances where the world has gone through what it's gone through in the last 24 months, and post COP26 may go through even more transformational change. We now move to the last case study, and in doing so, I'd like to welcome Ben Warren, who is the National Manager for Electrification and Mobility at Nissan Motor Corporation in Australia. Not so much to talk about the case study that's in the Pulse report, but in another program of work which is also going on and being led by Nissan in concert with other partners in Australia, that has just as much importance, particularly in Australia because of its vast distances and remote and regional areas. But I won't steal the thunder, and I welcome Ben to give us that insight. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Andrew. I guess the body of work that we've been working through for some time is a really interesting one, in that when we think about the way people are going to move around in the future and how it changes, no doubt there's more efficient ways that we can use our cars, because let's face it, most people buy cars to park them. They sit around for 90% of their lives quite idle. And so similar to what Ian was talking about just before, and how do we more effectively utilize those assets as we transition to different mobility solutions? We're working from home more and more at the moment. Does that mean we no longer need a car? Does that mean we need to change the way we think about our car? And that's where the interesting initiative around electric vehicles comes from. And can they be more than transport? And really, firstly, the transition to EVs is happening around the world. Some markets faster than others. We will get there eventually here in Australia, but certainly the transition to low and more importantly, zero emission transport is happening. And with that change, what do we get, right? We get electric vehicles that are brilliant transport solutions. They are brilliant cars to drive. They're fun, they're fast, responsive, they're smooth, they're quiet, they're all these things. But they also bring a host of other benefits, making them more than just purely a mobility or a transport solution. And so the piece of work is really around vehicle to grid and utilizing that vehicle in not only a transport solution, but also an energy asset solution. So if we jump to the next slide, when we think about vehicle to grid, so like all electric cars, the Nissan Leaf, it needs to be charged. But unlike other vehicles on the market, you can also discharge the vehicle into the home. So you can use the car to capture renewable energy during the day, for example, and then feed that energy back into your home at the evenings or when renewables are not available. So you're effectively not only decarbonising your transport, you're also decarbonising or assisting to decarbonise energy as well. This is particularly important as the automotive industry is going through the biggest change since the horse and cart, with electric vehicles and different other powertrain options. Equally, the energy system is going through as big a change as we move from centralized fossil fuel led generators to decentralized, intermittent, renewable solutions. And so the bridging to that is batteries and storage and being able to capture the power when it's available and use it at times when it's not. So if we go to the next slide, effectively what you have is a very nice car parked in your driveway. That's also the world's sexiest home battery. And so the idea or the concept is relatively simple. We are taking power from the car, which is otherwise not being used for anything, and using it to power the home, the grid, supporting the neighborhood. So conceptually, very, very easy. However, actually taking the concept to reality is a little bit more trickier than that. In order to get to that, there's many stakeholders and moving pieces to work through these new technologies. And so you need to run trials and different programs to get the regulatory frameworks and the business models set up. So typically with these programs, you're looking at a couple of different factors. So technical factors, so how does it connect? How does the system behave under certain conditions? How does the charging device function? How does it fit in to the rest of the market? You've then got the economical side of things of what's the revenue streams that we can generate, what's the value for the different players in the market, and how do you unlock the I guess economic return of using your car as an energy asset. And then you've got the social element around consumer expectations, how much control will they hand over to a third party to orchestrate the charging and discharging on their behalf, for example. So all of these things are actually tied together and take a lot of work and development to bed down the final piece. And this is where, again, those trial programs are really critical. So the work that we're working on here is actually showcasing and launching these programs in concert with other partners to bring these trials to life. So if we go to the next slide, one example of that is Australia's first vehicle to grid program, which is the REVS project, stands for Realising Electric Vehicle to Grid Services. And this is a project in the ACT using 51 Nissan Leaf in the ACT government fleet to provide vehicle to grid support, providing services to support the stability of the grid. So if we have an outage for whatever reason, the vehicles collectively in their respective car parks can respond and provide support to the grid during those temporary times where the supply and demand balance comes out of whack. So to bring this to life, we need a host of players at the table, because it's not just automotive, it's not just a car thing, this is an energy thing, this is a regulatory thing, this involves everybody. So we have players from the energy and the transport systems. We have Akshu AGL as the energy retailer in Canberra. We have Evo Energy as the poles and wires network operators. We've got the ACT government as the owner or the drivers of the vehicles, and SG Fleet as the managers of those vehicles. Obviously ourselves providing the cars, Jet Charge providing the charging infrastructure and the integration work to make the whole system function. And then the Australian National University as the team collating all of the knowledge sharing and best practice across the globe, but also how the project is tracking and where it fits into the wider energy ecosystem. And we can't do this alone. This project was supported from ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, as part of their Advancing Renewables program. And we're very thankful for the partnerships across the total ecosystem to be able to actually prove and showcase this type of technology. We're not 100% there yet, but our work is happening to bring this to life here in Australia for the first time. So on that point, I guess if I move to the next slide, just to conclude, what does this all mean? Why does this matter? Well, again, we come back to the original point that as we move to a new world, how we move about, how we utilize transport and mobility solutions, we need to be thinking about the most effective way we use the assets and the resources that we have. As I said off the bat, we have an electric vehicle that is unbelievably brilliant to drive, but we also have a battery in that we can use for other things. We have renewable energy changing the way the grid works. We have all of a sudden this coming together of two industries under massive disruption, where they each can solve one another's challenges. And as we move to a world where we work from home, for example, all of a sudden that car that sits in our driveway a little bit more than it once did can be doing something the entire time. So you're actually getting value out of what is traditionally a very low utilization asset. So we're pretty excited at the prospect of this. There's a lot of work to come in this space to bring it to life, but the opportunity is real, and we're excited to keep following this path. And with that, I'll hand back to Andrew.
Thank you, Ben. All right, let's now welcome everyone else back to the Q&A, and in doing so, I will open up the screen so we're all visible. And the question in my mind, and I think we all talked about this quite recently, was, and John highlighted the fact that this work was done just at the cusp of the beginning of not so much the pandemic, but certainly the lockdown. And so a lot of masks and needles, for that matter, have passed under the bridge in a pejorative sense between now and then. And I'm interested to hear, particularly from John and Iain, and there's in fact a question to Iain in relation to the challenges that the pandemic provides, not just to, the pandemic provides to ride sharing, but what comes next, particularly post-pandemic and perhaps the different world we live in. But I might start with John, and any probably qualitative observations that you'd make around the change in landscape of mobility solutions that have or have not manifested themselves since the report came out. And then we'll move to Iain.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I think it's certainly very appropriate to look at some of the beyond mobility changes that have taken place, and the obvious one for me, and I think virtually all of our colleagues have commented on this as well, is the change in attitude towards working from home. And I think my take on that would be that this is a structural change in the world of work, and certainly in an Australian context, but there's evidence far beyond this. Much of it collected in ITLS studies is that we are not resetting the clock. We're not going back to the what was the traditional Monday to Friday working week. But what does this mean for mobility? I think it means that for our agenda is we need to really work closely, perhaps campaign is the word, on understanding and promoting the mobility requirements that are suitable for the flexible working environment, because we know that traffic levels have already returned, in some cases exceed pre-COVID levels. We know that we are losing some formerly committed public transport commuters to using the private car on the reduced number of days that they might go back to the office. So we do need to get the employer buy-in to implementing the types of solutions that Iain has talked about, for example, and we need a greater awareness of the opportunities are there. We're working very closely with our colleagues in Transport for New South Wales to help them refine their travel demand management programme. And again, I know Iain is directly involved in that as well. But this is perhaps the era of good TDM. I'll let some of the others have a go now.
So with that, John, the comment about the responsibility of the employer, which is an interesting one, and I want to give a shout out to our participants, because they're incredibly well behaved in relation to delivering the questions through the Q&A function. And I want to add, before Iain does, the question that one of our participants has asked, which is around the role of ride sharing during COVID. And what has Iain's experience been with people being resistant to using shared transport services, given all the current biosecurity concerns, whether real or perceived? Over to you, Iain.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as someone in the customer-facing team at Lift Tango, I can tell you we weren't very happy with the number of inquiries coming to the website about people wanting to investigate ride-sharing, carpooling solutions during COVID. So there was a bit on the nose, trying to encourage people to share transport together. And that was just a reality. So while we were humming along nicely, and then COVID hit, and all of a sudden shared transport was not the best thing to do for obvious reasons. So there's been a long slog back to ride sharing, carpooling, public transport being really an acceptable way to get around in a lot of people's minds. And I think probably maybe it's the safety issues is what people are concerned about. But on the flip side of that, particularly in the on-demand public transport space, what we've seen is that while people are avoiding the big buses that everyone gets on, they're a little bit happier to get on the smaller vehicles with, say, 3 or 4 other people spaced out. I guess taking an acceptable risk type of approach to trips that they do have to take. So that's been a really interesting trend to watch, and that's grown. So while I think public transport in general has suffered horrifically in terms of ridership, the on-demand transport examples haven't suffered anywhere near what you expect. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch. And what we're seeing now, I think Australia's probably still several months behind places like the US. So some of the large businesses we're dealing with in the US are starting to get people back. Having said that, they're still a bit reticent, and while they're encouraging people to come back, they're potentially delaying some things, perhaps until around December, January, just to see what happens. So there's a general, I guess what the positive from that is that the businesses are concerned, but the way we work has changed. What we're seeing is businesses are more aware of the responsibility they have towards employees, from mental health, from the social health, from all the other things that go just apart from the transactional exchange of work for money. So I think that's really changing the way businesses are perceiving their role in commuter travel, and I think that's something that's going to grow and change. I'm really hopeful that the businesses will continue to do more in that space. So yeah, ride sharing has been on the nose, but it's definitely coming back, and I think we'll start to see a bit of an increase in that space over the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
Okay. Interesting. Well, we'll hold you to that prognostication.
Absolutely.
And invest accordingly. Let me take advantage of another question that's come in from the audience, and it's a question for everyone, but I'll start with Iain so that everybody else gets to think about their own answer. But it was a really good one, and I just want to expand what the question was asking. It asks, in a regional town centre, what do you think are likely to be the best shared transport solutions? And I know you will go to the Newcastle example in just a moment, but I want to broaden that for both Melissa and for Ben in relation to the work that you're doing. And because Australia is a vast country and that regional and rural towns, in one sense, we don't want to leave them behind in relation to this mobility transformation. So what are some of the opportunities or the challenges that you see with the work that you're doing that could be equally applied into regional towns? But let's go to Iain first. Over to you.
Yeah, well, firstly, Newcastle's a city, not a town. Come on.
Oh,
I'd point
right.
to actually a project we were involved in Moree, which had very poor to no transport until they implemented an on-demand transport solution. It was old school, we might call it. It was dial a ride, phone in the day before, and the bus will come and pick you up. But in Moree, there's very low socioeconomic demographics. Very low car ownership. They're crying out for a transport solution. It was just terrible equity, basically, terrible transport equity. But certainly there's no way you put fixed route buses in there. So in that kind of setting where on-demand transport is able to relatively affordably provide a massive increase in transport equity, I think that's the kind of area that we should be focusing on, not just the downtown Uber as a bus type of approach, but really addressing those transport inequalities that exist, particularly in the region. So I think that's where I like to focus my work. I think it's a good place to really make a big impact on a big scale.
Okay, that's good. So let's move to Melissa. How do we take EV trucks to the regions?
Thanks, Andrew. Actually, we're looking at more accessibility, so how we can actually get closer to our customers instead of trying to encourage our customers to come to us. So we actually recently trialed a pickup point in Central Coast, which was really well received from everyone on the Central Coast. The fact that we actually had this temporary pickup point, and it was more of looking at how do we use locker systems, et cetera, for people to then access goods, and working through our service providers as they're doing drop-offs in those regional areas, how they can also supply goods there. So really looking at in the totality, the ecosystem, and what's our footprint and how we can be more efficient of how do we reach the many people within those regional areas, at more looking at what is the needs, what are they buying? We're analyzing that within that space as well too. And therefore, what is the square footage or maybe temporary facilities that we need to be able to fulfill our logistics part of that leg. So it's not just looking at electric vehicles, it's looking at other ways that we can have smaller touch points where we could be more closer to our customers, but then also working together with our third-party providers as well as our logistics companies to see how we can manage our goods around the country more efficiently as well.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'll go to Ben and then I'll wrap up with the last question and start with John. So Ben, vehicle to grid makes an awful lot of sense for regional Australia. And of course, Canberra is not a regional, well, it's actually a regional epicenter in one sense, but it's a great opportunity, surely.
Absolutely. I think I grew up in regional Victoria. So the regional communities have as much opportunity, if arguably not more opportunity, for vehicle to grid, because you've got a really contained ecosystem. So the ability to have almost a microgrid within the community and having EVs play a role in that is certainly a huge opportunity. Obviously, there's the logistical challenges around charging infrastructure, driving range, some of those things. But when we think about how people most use their cars, you do some regular driving, you drive to maybe the next town, it's maybe a 50, 100 kilometre round trip. So the reality is you don't drive from Melbourne to Sydney every day, even if you are in a regional community. Now, that's obviously a very general statement, but there's significant opportunity in regional communities to use batteries, use solar, use vehicles as part of the overall storage solution.
and I would have thought amplified by the opportunity, particularly in New South Wales with the recent announcements of renewable energy zones, that you're going to have the generation of that energy within regions for the use by that region, in addition to it being put into a grid, whether it's distributed or whatever. The last question, and I'll cut it down a little bit, and it's to start with you, John. We all know that COP26, the COP that must succeed, is going to start in, I think it's less than 17 days' time, if I get my math right. And I'm interested to hear your quick thought from all of you as to what you think the COP is going to deliver in relation to sustainable transport, or what you would hope to see the COP deliver in relation to sustainable transport. John, we'll start with you, and we'll end, as always, with Ben.
And indeed a quick answer, and thank you. If I might just quickly circle back to the previous question and say, and it's partly an answer to this question as well, that regional must be on the on the agenda alongside metropolitan issues, and we're just in the process of initiating a new project on mobility as a service and what it might mean for rural towns and regional hinterlands. But yes, looking forward post COP26, I think in an Australian context, a much greater and a much more serious look at the role of alternative fuels for transportation.
All right.
We're doing our bit in ITLS, working closely with the public transport sector to promote the zero emission buses agenda, and we're also very interested in essentially joining up Ben and Iain's activities in a rural context as well, where we see electric vehicle applications for shared mobility in a rural and regional context as well. And let's not forget logistics, so we bring in Melissa, so that joins the circle. Thank you.
Melissa, what's your one?
Yes, I was just going to add on to that. Completely concur with John as well. Again, we're just looking at zero emissions, so we're very much open to a lot of different solutions, including hydrogen, again, when we're talking about maybe our long haul vehicles, but definitely we're moving away from just looking at EV to zero emissions, and very keen to look at some of the solutions that will come post COP26.
Thank you, Melissa. Iain?
I'll keep it simple and I'll say better transport equity for all, particularly in the regional area.
Well, transport for a start would be handy, yeah.
Transport would help.
Ben, last word.
Yeah, I think having the long-term direction locked in with the right interim goals gives everyone the benchmarks on what they need to work through. The automotive business has really long product planning and lead times. So the decision we take today actually impacts us in best case, maybe 6 years' time, maybe 12 years' time. So we've got to take decisions today on what we want the future to look like, so everybody is ready when we get there.
Oh, well done. Thank you. Great way to end. So conscious that we've gone a little bit over time, but I thought it was incredibly valuable to do so. Let me, on behalf of BCSD Australia, thank so much John, Iain, Melissa and Ben and their organisations for not just participating today, but participating in the work program in Cities and Mobility, and particularly in the work that generated this report. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank again the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs for the opportunity of bringing you this side event. And of course, our sponsor, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, as always, with great support and camaraderie that we have in the work that is led out of the WBCSD. That's it for us for now. This has been recorded, however, and the side event will be available on the BCSD Australia website in the not too distant future, and will be circulated through our website and on our LinkedIn page. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, audience. We do value your contribution. We wish you a safe and happy onward journey in your life, particularly as we look towards the success of COP26. But for now, I'm Andrew Peterson. Thank you so much for joining, and good afternoon to you all.